Assalamualaikum and good evening to everyone, and welcome to our ASEAN Series Forum here held at Putrajaya International Convention Center. I'd like to appreciate everyone, especially to our fellow panelists here. And today our topic will be talking about the stigmatization of mental illness among youth in ASEAN region. I, myself, as Zuhai, will be playing as a moderator and as well as the ASEAN representative. And on my left is Professor Sabil from the University of Mahidol from Thailand. And on my right is Encik Safwan from the the Malaysian Youth Parliament representative, and as well as a psychiatrist. So I would like to begin this forum discussion today by opening up the status quo of mental illness stigmatization among the youth in ASEAN. Depression and anxiety are the two most common mental illness in ASEAN region. And I'd like to pull out a quote by saying that the Malaysian above the age of 16 suffered from mental illness. This number constituted at an 11.2% increase from 2006. The stigmatization towards mental illness is highly embedded in Southeast Asian cultures, and when this culture becomes a part of their life, it somehow affects those around them. Even though this modernization has influenced the expansion of mental health services, the perception of mental illness is slower to change. The efforts in containing the stigmatization of mental illness has shown static progression leading to even serious problems such as violence. And I quote, this can be seen how Indonesian population of adolescents ages of 10 to 19-year-olds having a 33.6% of respondents involving in physical fights one or more times. And I'd like to pass it on to Encik Safwan for his rebuttal.
Thank you, Encik Zuhal. I, Safwan from the Malaysian Youth Parliament, would state a claim of fear factors of youth mental illness. So firstly, denial of mental illness by the parents can result in late presentation of mental illness by the youth, leading on to further complications. And those with minor mental illness try to avoid contact with psychiatric services due to the fear of stigmatization. And this can be further seen in the article of Stigma of Mental Illness in Asian Cultures. The negative and unsympathetic attitude towards the mentally ill is seen as a major contributing factors of suicide among Singaporeans. And you can see this in Mental Disorders in Singapore, the article. And the stigmatization is an outcome of a process where it starts from tiger parenting, leading on to depression. Once this depression has been recognized by the tiger parents, the blame is put on others rather than themselves. And the cultural context, each and every component of these is heavily influenced by culture. For instance, tiger parent has become a primary source of safeguarding their child, which has been passed down from generations to generations.
Thank you, Encik Safwan. But I would like to say that you cannot blame parents or those around them. The children themselves are to be held responsible for the fear of stigmatization.
Yes, I do agree with Inche Zohar here. Although peer pressure may be the cause of stigmatization, I do see that the youth themselves would stigmatize when they actually have mental illness due to the fact that they go through a process mostly known as the self-isolation process. And through this, I would like to actually add on a point in this particular forum, to which, in my point, I would like to talk about the cultural perception of our neighboring nations in the ASEAN region. So, ladies and gentlemen, besides putting the blame on others, I do believe that in the cultural context of mental illness itself has caused stigmatization towards this particular problem. And this particular problem, especially in the cultural context, is due to the fact that we as the ASEAN community hold culture as a very important element in our lives. So I would like to choose one of the dominant cultures here in the ASEAN region, which is the Chinese culture, where those family members who actually experience mental illness, they do have a problem where their family members do not see it as a positive thing to be dealt with, due to the fact that mental illness is seen as as seen as a tarnishing problem, which may cause problems to the family name, to the honor, and to their ancestors as well. Ladies and gentlemen, uh, when this particular problem has been identified by the families, they have the tendency to actually wish to conceal this disgrace from being exposed. And the greater the conceal of this disgrace, the more illness the more intense the psychiatric stigma is. And in the sense of cultural context, we do not just see it in the sense of just religion and race, but I do see in the sense of age, in the sense of economic status, as well as education level. Now, when we talk about age, education level, as well as economic status, I do see that those who are older and those who are within the lower economic status as well as the lower education level, they tend to have the highest stigmatization towards mental illness due to the fact that they have greater intolerance and rejection towards this particular illness. But though I may show this as a one-sided problem, those who have higher education level as well as higher economic status, they do also have stigmatization towards this particular mental illness. And in a way, this particular stigmatization is more of a greater feeling of shame and guilt, especially when it comes to members of the family. And when we want to talk about cultural perception, the way how we treat them, the way how we treat members who are being diagnosed with mental illness, is that we send them to hospital, meaning that we send them to go through hospitalization. And based on my research, I do see that those who are sent for hospitalization, they tend to have more stigmatization towards mental illness. Especially those mental illness that is being experienced by youth in the ASEAN region. Therefore, I do believe that for us to actually curb this particular problem, we need to actually establish community care in order for us to actually curb this particular problem. And though I may speak in the sense of cultural context, but I do believe that we need to actually compare the cultures among the ASEAN community itself, due to the fact that there are different approaches and there are different perceptions in different cultures towards this particular mental illness.
Well, I do agree with your point, Professor Sabil, regarding the cultural context. But on the other hand, cultural context, it can't be generalized. There are other aspects and factors regarding the stigmatization of youths.
Uh, Thank you, Encik Safwan. I'd like to address what's called this new what's called ASEAN's way in dealing with the stigmatization of mental illness. Basically, ASEAN has set forth a proposal to address the issue through the what's called the mindfulness of interfaith dialogue, a proposal for what's called ASEAN youth. A proposal is aimed to provide a stage of youth to express their concerns and to create awareness and compassion. As culture may be one of the many causes, the proposal allows the congregation of of ideas from youth of different backgrounds in ASEAN to realize the importance of collaborated effort in dealing with stigmatization of mental illness. Stigmatization of mental illness among youth should be seen as a serious issue, as it is a very concerning level to which may be difficult to be solved. Hence, the interfaith dialogue would allow youth of different culture to share their concerns on stigmatization and ways to approach. The U.S. approach in tackling depression among juveniles is ideal in dealing with stigmatization of mental illness. Reason being that the current state of stigmatization can only be addressed through an aggressive manner.
I do applaud for the efforts of ASEAN, particularly in actually curbing this particular problem. However, as a professor of psychology, I do see a proposal denoting uncertainty, and to which addressing the factors of prejudice stigmatization towards mental illness among youth in ASEAN, the way how ASEAN is approaching this particular problem is more based on an assumption rather than being on a factual side. And to which I would like to bring the audience attention to how we are able to actually address the factors of prejudice stigma in ASEAN through the opinions of between me and Dr. Lim Sharif from the Penang Medical College. Members of the hall, I have a colleague of mine named Dr. Lim Sharif from the Penang Medical College, to which she and I share the same idea on how we are able to address the factors of prejudice stigma in the ASEAN region, particularly concerning about mental illness. According to Dr. Lim, she believes that in order for us to actually address prejudice stigma, we should actually see in the four main areas. And these four main areas are the media, are the are media, the society, medical education, as well as the field of psychiatry itself. Now, let me go through one by one. In the sense of media, I do believe that the reason why prejudice stigma or stigmatization can actually occur is due to the fact that inaccurate media portrayal is a serious problem, as the media is crucial in influencing public perception. And besides public perception, as well as the inaccurate media portrayal, I do believe that for us to actually curb this stigmatization, public education itself must be more effective if they were to focus on this particular group of people. And this is agreed with Dr. Lim as well. Besides media as well as public education, Malaysia, as I would say, currently we are in Malaysia, and I would take it as an example. Malaysia is a melting pot of cultures, and with that comes different languages, different types of uh, culture, religion, as well as many other aspects that may become a barrier in this situation. That may become a barrier in this situation. Therefore, Dr. Lim has agreed that in order for us to actually help this particular problem as well as the barriers of different languages, I do believe that psychiatric terminology should be adapted to the local language and cultural beliefs to avoid misconception. Besides that also, I do believe that doctors and other healthcare professionals play an important role as to how they help in minimizing stigmatization towards mental illness among youth in ASEAN. And how do I say so is that their role as to how they need to portray positive attitude towards mental health problems or mental illnesses can actually help patients to manage their problems and to become much better in their mental illness. And for us to actually help this particular problem, I do believe that fresh medical graduates from medical school, particularly in Malaysia itself as an example, I do believe they need to actually be posted first in the psychiatric department in a hospital or in any other healthcare institution, because I do believe that through early psychiatric posting, they will actually help to implement or to actually build these positive feelings towards this particular problem. And in Malaysia itself, there's this term where fresh graduate who just started posting is what we call as horsemanship. And I do believe that if the Ministry of Health in Malaysia actually encourages more medical graduates to actually start their posting in psychiatry, it will actually help them in actually having more positive attitude towards this particular problem. Lastly, in actually addressing these particular factors, I do believe a way in which psychiatrists play the most important role, as they are equipped with the proper knowledge and should correct misconception, avoid misdiagnosis and ineffective treatments. Besides that also, cultural competency also leads to better management of patients by awareness towards social, cultural and religious influences as well.
Thank you, Encik Sabil. I mean, sorry, Professor Sabil. And I would like to what's called point to Encik Safwan. Was there anything you would like to say?
Thank you, Encik Zuhar. Well, regarding the existing efforts from a psychiatrist's point of view, the change of attitudes of youth towards mental illness, the government and charities have pushed to change the youth perception of mental illness and for it to be treated in the same way as physical health. Why? Government across ASEAN have also been embarking on educational programs and campaigns, especially in schools, trying to educate teachers and youths about mental illness.
I appreciate your input on that, but however, prejudice are also strong against psychiatrists, even medical professionals.
Well, regarding to the access to treatment, more youth are getting treatment, and the treatment in a way is getting cheaper and more accessible, given that most Southeast Asian countries have universal health care, and they are heavily subsidized by the government.
Sorry. What's called, however, what's called general, there are general reluctance, what's called reluctant in seeking psychiatric care. People would choose friends, family doctors, relatives, or clergymen before resorting to any psychiatric services.
Well, globalization and the ease of access to the internet means that more youth can get self-diagnosed and get treatment easier. Social media allows the youth to share their stories about mental illness, therefore creating a sort of environment whereby more youths are feeling more comfortable in getting help. And with social media, discussion among youth and adults are happening about mental illness, making it easier for the older generation to sympathize with the youth.
So I do agree on this particular matter with Encik Safwan, but um, there there's a belief that I hold where the more information people know, the harder for them to get help, given that people nowadays are not sure to what symptoms they have due to the fact that information nowadays are seen as contradicting as to how more associating with these particular problems.
Right, thank you, Professor Sabil and Chit Safwan. However, time is not in our hands for today to further discuss on this particular matter. However, we do hope from this discussion our fellow what's called audience what's called have gained some insight, not to mention representative of the government, resolving what's called this unconscious issue. We do hope what's called to meet you again in our next ASEAN series forum, which will be held in Singapore, discussing on issues for the betterment of our ASEAN region. Thank you and good night.